Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 186, the English edition. Now, I'm not saying we have a Spanish edition, but we certainly have an English version. I'm Kevin Carlson.
I'm the Reverend Peter Old, and today is June the 19th, 2015.
All right, we have the guy called Peter Old with the cleanest office in the history of clergy. It's not. We're going to be doing something different today. It's called Inside Baseball. We have to call it Inside Cricket is what we have to do.
No, it's Inside Rounders.
Yes, because...
Inside Rounders, thank you very much.
We're going to talk about stuff that the average Anglican's going to be affected by, but may not really understand. So we have to back up a little bit. First of all, we have to address this. It is really hard to piss off a Brit. Am I right?
Yeah, apart from when you use language like that. Yeah, on the whole, in America, you order a steak at a restaurant. The steak is tough. You sue them for $500,000, right?
Right.
Here in Britain, right, you order a steak. In England, the steak comes, it's tough as old boots, the vegetables are completely overboiled, the béarnaise tastes like cat's vomit, and on the table you go, this steak is tough, the vegetables are rubbish, the steak, the sauce béarnaise has the consistency of Catherine Jefferson-Shaw's sermon, it's rubbish. The waiter comes over to you and says, "How are your meals?" And you go, "Oh, they're fantastic. Tastes lovely." Right? That's what English people do, okay?
So
it takes a lot to hack English people off, and especially clergy, because in the Church of England we have the cult of nice,
right.
Okay? You have to be nice. And the worst sin, the unforgivable sin, okay, is not rampant sexual immorality. It's not being nice.
Right. And I want to set that up for the audience before we get into this inside cricket, inside rounders, because they have to understand, why hasn't Britain exploded already? Why haven't the clergy revolted against the bishops revolted against the archbishops? What has happened? Well, it's because you guys are nice.
You guys are nice, and there just isn't a culture of doing that.
It's the culture. So... we have to set this up. A little bit of background. A clergyman married a dude.
A clergyman married a dude. Well, in fact, two clergymen married the dude.
Right.
But this particular clergyman called Jeremy Pemberton married a dude. Mm-hmm. And he was a hospital chaplain working in Lincoln Diocese, but living in Southwell and Nottingham Diocese.
Right.
So Jeremy Pemberton got hauled into the Bishop of Lincoln's office, where he works and holds a license as a hospital chaplain from the Bishop of Lincoln. And in Lincoln, he got a slap on his hand, a formal admonition, as it were, that kind of thing. And that's it, right? Mm. In Southwell and Nottingham, something slightly different happened. So the diocesan bishop had sort of resigned and was moving on to another diocese. The suffragan bishop in the diocese wasn't very well, so a guy called Richard Inwood, who was the suffragan bishop of Bedford, recently retired, was working as the acting bishop of Southwell for like a day a week, and he dealt with Jeremy Pemberton. And the first thing he did upon hearing that Jeremy Pemberton had entered same-sex marriage against the clear instruction of the House of Bishops in what was known as the Valentine's Day Statement.
Right.
The first thing he did was, in accordance with that statement, was he withdrew Jeremy Pemberton's permission to officiate, so his PTO, in Southwell Diocese. Okay, so remember, in Lincoln, he's still got the license to do his job as a chaplain, but in Southwell Diocese, where he's living, and I think singing in the cathedral choir as well, he withdraws his PTO. Okay, much wailing and gnashing of teeth.
Right.
Then Jeremy Pemberton applies for a job in Southwell Diocese, but not a diocesan job, a National Health Service job as a chaplaincy manager in the Sherwood Forest Hospital Trust. Sherwood Forest
is Robin Hood. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Riding through the glen. Right. And the NHS say that their hospital chaplains must have the formal accreditation, proper licensing from the denomination that they come from. So they want to offer him the job. By all accounts, he's a good hospital chaplain, right? All other things being equal, right?
Yeah.
It's perfectly possible to commit one sin but be good at something else and be a nice bloke, because we're nice here in England. And so the NHS asks the acting Bishop of Southall and Nottingham for a license for Jeremy to do his job, and the acting bishop says no.
Whoa!
Because he's entered into a same-sex marriage, so I can't approve him for ministry.
So you're saying a bishop committed the heresy of accountability?
The bishop committed the gross liberal heresy of holding one of his clergy accountable to the rules that he agreed to when he got ordained. Yeah, I know. It's just a shocker. So eventually Jeremy Pemberton not very happy about this, and he's taken the Richard Inwood to the an employment tribunal.
Well,
and so for the last 4 days we've had that employment tribunal running, the first stage of it, certainly.
Yeah, now this is inside baseball because it's not even in the press in England yet.
Inside Rounders. Well, it has been. So finally it has been. So the Guardian and the Telegraph, a very left-wing broadsheet, fairly centre-right broadsheet, have both been faithfully reporting this every day, because they kind of get that this is a big deal. Because if the acting Bishop of Southall and Nottingham cannot withhold a license to someone who's broken the church rules or the guidance from the bishops, if it can't do that, then on what basis can it withhold a license anyway?
Sure, right.
So here are two things which are perfectly legal. Okay, first thing which is perfectly legal in England and Wales is to get married to someone of the same sex. Okay. The second thing, which is perfectly legal, is to have adultery, right? It's legal, yeah, right? And the moment that you start saying, well, you can't withhold a license for somebody just because they've entered a same-sex marriage, because marriage is a protected characteristic, right? Even though there is an exemption in the Equalities Act, it doesn't really, you shouldn't really have one, and blah, blah, blah. You start having this unraveling of well, why should you be denied a license because you dissolved your marriage, right? Why should that be a thing? If being married or not being married is a protected characteristic, why should that be a problem? And so, it's a big deal for the Church of England, this really, and some fairly senior lawyers have been on side for the bishop on this.
Okay, well, I've been reading some press reports from an organization called Reform. And I don't know if you're a member of that underground... I'm
not a member of Reform. I'm not a member of many organizations here.
Okay. And they mentioned a Bishop Alan Wilson, which is another clergyman who has never committed the heresy of accountability, apparently.
So Alan Wilson is pretty famous now for breaking the collegiality of the House of Bishops here. And the real sparking point, he's been sort of published a book which was really rubbish. You should read my review of it. It's just a rubbish book. And which of course means that all the liberals love it, right?
Right. Yeah, it's a bestseller.
Argumentation, so therefore it must be good. If it makes you feel good, then it must be a good. Who cares about the level of argumentation? Mm-hmm. So Alan Wilson, for the last 2 or 3 years, has been going off about gay rights and same-sex marriage and yada yada yada, and has been undermining publicly the stance of the House of Bishops on this. Has been doing the best job he can do of basically being ill-disciplined on this and all that kind of stuff. Joined by his chaplain, Rosie Harper, who makes Alan Wilson look tame on the issue. And this has all come to a head that he's gone on the record in the employment tribunal hearings to come and speak on behalf of Jeremy Pemberton to basically say, well, the Church of England's position on this is utter tosh, and the disciplinary process that they've sort of thought about is utter tosh, and the whole thing's rubbish, and anyway, we basically just make up doctrine as we go along, and it's just rubbish, you know. And it looks as though some of the clergy in Oxford Diocese, in particular in his part of Oxford, remember he's the Bishop of Buckingham, have just had enough, and they've sort of had enough privately for a long time. So they've been doing stuff like asking for other bishops to come and do confirmations and things like that, and so on. But this was like the straw that broke the camel's back, and so a statement out last night, this morning, and one of the chief signatories is this guy called Will Pierson G, who is the rector of Buckingham. So you have not Kramer versus Kramer, but you have Buckingham versus Buckingham. Okay, in this really almighty kerfuffle, and you know, publicly declaring that Alan Wilson is arrogant, and you know, I mean, this is not very English language.
It's no. That's why we started the show by explaining. You know, by the time a Englishman is ripe to explode, it may be too late.
And you know what? Will Pierson G is one of these sort of humble, quiet guys who's actually a bit of a robust guy behind the scenes. You know, he's an ex-army major. He's a business owner before he got ordained as well. You know, so he's not a guy to be pushed around, and yet at the same time, he's a guy who doesn't want to cause a fuss. I understand that he's been trying to keep all this behind the scenes, you know, and so on. But I think the final straw, Birdie tells me, is that he and others, before the Bishop of Oxford, John Pritchard, the last Bishop of Oxford, retired, and there's another story because it's taken them a year to try and find a replacement, and the last Crown nominations committee just failed to find a replacement. But when Bishop John Pritchard was in place, they basically went to him and said, "Look, this Alan Wilson is just, we can't have him. So can we have someone else to do our confirmations, please?" And John Pritchard basically, my understanding is, arranged that other bishops could come in and help out. So the Bishop of Dorchester, the Bishop of Reading, retired bishops could come and do confirmations and stuff like that. Okay? And this was all going on happily, and people like Will Pierson G were trying not to make a public fuss about it, because that's not very English, not very nice, and so on. A little birdie tells me that as soon as the Bishop of Oxford goes and is gone off the scene, and you've got an acting bishop who's one of the suffragan bishops, so he can't really pull rank on Alan Wilson, that Alan Wilson is picking up the phone to clergy and saying, actually, I'm the bishop, I come and do the confirmations, why are you undermining my authority, these kind of things? And hey, if I'm wrong on that, Alan Wilson, come onto Anglican TV and publicly say that you've never ever picked up the phone to a clergy person and made a fuss about them wanting to have somebody else come and do the confirmations. Okay,
well, that's a British throwdown right there.
Yeah, that's like, I haven't got a glove, I've just got that, right? You know, so my understanding is that people like Will Pierson G and some of the other signatories inside Oxford Diocese have basically had enough now. They've had enough, and the final straw was Alan Wilson in a court of law undermining collegiality. So not just sort of, you know, random side snipes in public and so on. In a court of law, undermining Church of England doctrine, undermining the collegiality of the House of Bishops. And that was it. And so you've got this big uprising. And my understanding is that's not even the half of it. Well, that actually they're still being English. There is other stuff going on behind the scenes. This isn't over by a long deal yet.
We got 2 minutes left, and I want to cover one more topic. And we'll obviously follow up in a couple
of minutes.
Yeah. Well, in 2 minutes. If we're, you know, an Englishman, it can't be that hard at all. I am reading that the Church of England is going to officially bless the Gay Pride Parade. You know, I've got 4 or 5 emails here. Kevin, did you hear? Kevin, you need to know. Kevin, oh my God, it's all over. What's going on?
So the Gay Pride March in York begins outside the York Minster, and that's because that's a good place for it to start.
It is, yes.
So this year, one of the senior canons from York Minster is actually going to bless the gay pride. Now, we know that blessing things and saying things are holy means that God approves of them and endorses them and says there's nothing wrong with them.
I will bless you to be a blessing. Canada, yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. So do you remember the Anglican Church of Canada over gay marriage sneakily pushing through that resolution about holy relationships and so on, right? And that's utter uproar. So the obviously some journalists have been on to the Archbishop of York about this, and the Archbishop of York has basically deferred back to the Dean of York, who's issued a statement. Now, this is really interesting because first thing it tells us that the Archbishop of York does not want to get sucked into this politically. He knows this is a minefield. Yeah. And secondly, the statement from the Dean of York, I'm sure you'll pop it up onto Anglican Inc., the statement from the Dean of York conveniently avoids the key issue, which isn't that the churches turn up and say, hey, gay pride, go for it, that they are going to bless the gay pride. So what does that mean? Are they blessing every single aspect of the gay pride? Are they blessing all the people who parade? If anybody does anything sexually provocative, are they blessing that? Are they going to bless any group that is part of the gay pride parade? What exactly are they blessing? Well, can you let us know, please, York Minster, what are you blessing and why are you blessing it?
Just the theology behind blessing anything that has pride in the name is
this is it, isn't it? Yeah, if this was gay humility, right? And this is interesting, isn't it? Because talking about what we've just been talking about a rector, an Orthodox rector, who's actually an incredibly humble man, an incredibly low-key man who doesn't want to cause a fuss, who doesn't want to be prideful and open. Compare that to this. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I think it's one thing to come out and express support, but it's another thing in the name of the Church of England to publicly say God approves of this, and if you bless it, what you're basically saying is that if you don't like it, you're anti-God. That's what you're saying, okay? That's actually why, as a Church of England priest, I am very hesitant to bless anything that the Church hasn't told me explicitly I can bless. Okay? I'm very hesitant. So I know, Church of England clergy bless fox hunts and tractors and houses and blah blah blah. I don't do that.
That's good.
Okay, I don't do that because I'm very hesitant of blessing. Sure. I'll bless the things that Jesus blesses and that God blesses, but I don't make up my mind and decide that I can discern the mind of God and know exactly the things that He blesses. I certainly wouldn't bless something as controversial as this, even if I was in favour, which I'm not.
No. We want to treat it like a fig tree. Well, we'll get onto that some other time.
No, it's one thing. Let's be clear. It's one thing to say, okay, I think that at times gay and lesbian people have been treated appallingly by the church, because that is true. And it's one thing to actually turn up and, as some Christians do, and I know some of the viewers of this show won't agree with this, but it's one thing to turn up and do these kind of I'm sorry things, right? So evangelical pastors, some of them orthodox on this issue, some of them wobbling, but they will turn up and go, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that in the past we've actually said nasty things about you, and that you have got the impression that we hate you because of who you are, not because of what you do. All those kind of things. One thing to say, actually, that is wrong, and we want you to know that we're sorry, and we want you to know that actually God loves you. Mm-hmm. God loves you as a human being. God loves you. One thing to do that, but it's another thing to lay your hands on somebody and say everything that you stand for is good and blessed by God and is holy and righteous. That's another thing entirely. It really is.
Well, that was the fastest 2 minutes ever.
A bit more than 2 minutes, but hey.
I'm Kevin Carlson.
I'm Peter Old still.
And you've been watching Anglican Unscripted.